The essay that I, and perhaps with an assist by the Kitty Cat Biscuit, will present is called Confluence in Natasha Trethewey's White Lies. This essay was a collaboration between me and Elise W. Jones. Elise is also an English professor as well as my wife. It was originally delivered to the College English Association's International Conference in San Antonio, Texas in the spring of 2023. And again, the title is Confluence in Natasha Trethewey's White Lies. Natasha Trethewey was born in Gulfport, Mississippi on April 26, 1966, the 100th anniversary of the first Confederate Memorial Day. This anniversary certainly sparked no celebrations in the growing Trethewey household, for Canadian-born Eric Trethewey was white, while Gwendolyn Ann Turnbull was black. Racist miscegenation laws in Mississippi made the Tretheweys' marriage illegal, a status not reversed until the United States Supreme Court struck down such laws 1 year later in its Loving v. Virginia decision. From the beginning, then, Natasha Trethewey represented the confluence of races and cultures, white and black, Old South and New. She also grew up during a time, very much like ours, when keeping the peace and maintaining one's status often meant telling little white lies about what race and culture had come to signify in the Gulf Coast and, later, the Georgia of her youth. The poem White Lies, published in 2000, offers an extended meditation within such a context of what these type of lies require and what they represent. The first-person narrator, who is light-skinned enough to pass, does so in the Deep South at a time when Maison Blanche stores, which went bankrupt in 1979, still had cultural significance. We might reasonably understand the narrator as someone very much like Natasha Trethewey in racial identity, geography, and time. She describes herself in terms that reflect great color consciousness, quote, light bright, near white, high yellow, red boned, in a black place, lines 3 through 5. Neither fully black nor white, but living in a world that privileges whiteness, the girl has learned to tell white lies, supported by the perceived color of her skin. Both the poem and the culture posit an us versus a them who are defined in racial terms. They are the white folks, line 7, while we are consigned to a black identity. The white folks live uptown, line 8, while their darker brethren occupy a, quote, pink and green shantified shotgun section along the tracks, lines 8 through 10. White classmates wear clothing from Maison Blanche, a New Orleans chain that translates as White House, compared with the, quote, homemade dresses, line 11, of the narrator. By the time of the poem, the two races attend class together, establishing that the poem occurs in 1970 or later. Still, as the first few lines illustrate, a level of de facto segregation prevails. One place where the appearance but not the reality of segregation remains is the bedroom. The narrator manifests an emerging awareness of sexuality when she tells us that she must remain quiet as kept, line 15, about her decision to pass. The word kept references the light-skinned African-American women, sometimes referred to as quadroons or octoroons, kept in Gulf Coast towns, especially New Orleans, as the mistresses and playthings of wealthy white men. Perhaps the narrator anticipates or even desires such a future for herself. The narrator's mother does not respond favorably when she learns what her daughter has been doing at school. Quote, I paid for it every time Mama found out, lines 19 through 20. The narrator recalls, going on to tell how her mother first, quote, laid her hands on me, line 21, and then washed out my mouth with ivory soap, lines 22 to 23. Ivory soap, which is solid white, famously advertised that it was 99 and 44/100% pure, well above the level of whiteness required not to run afoul of Southern states' one-drop rule, which declared as black any person with one black great-great-great-grandparent. People have 32 great-great-great-grandparents, so one equals slightly more than 3%. The child version of the narrator has craved this 99.44% level of whiteness, and so when her mother strove to, quote, purify, line 24, her, she seized upon this characteristic of ivory soap and, quote, swallowed suds, thinking they'd work from the inside out. Lines 26 to 28. The girl tragically seems to believe that her mother's remedy for her lying tongue, line 25, can carry her beyond even the status of a kept woman who can pass. The ivory suds can literally make her almost unconditionally white. As we can see, the white lies of Trethewey's poem are more than the little fibs people tell on a daily basis. They're actual lies about whiteness that draw upon a host of assumptions and layers of serious puns and references to whiteness that reinforce a perception of whiteness as superior to its binary opposite, blackness. Anna Leahy has written of 3 lies that the narrator tells in the second stanza. First, she lies about living, quote, uptown. Then, in what Leahy calls, quote, a pretense, unquote, rather than, quote, a false utterance, unquote, the narrator misleads her classmates about her homemade dresses. Finally, Leahy notes she lies by omission. When the white girl squeezes her hand and says, quote, now we have 3 of us in this class, lines 17 through 18, the narrator, through her silence, assents to this understanding. We never exactly learn of the narrator's ruse being detected, only that her mother becomes aware of it and punishes her for duplicity. The child seems to have sought to do more than deceive. In her quest for whiteness, she has sought to correct what she perceives as a wrong. Jennifer Sullivan writes that the narrator, quote, is insinuating that she is out of place and belongs with the white people instead, unquote. As Sullivan points out, the narrator describes herself as, quote, in a black place, line 5, a word choice suggesting that the child finds herself in what she considers the wrong place. The presumably African-American mother, whom the speaker calls the most affectionate term mama, can put her hands on the child and force suds into her mouth, but she cannot reach her in the way she desires. Mama wants to stop her daughter from lying. However, the child interprets her language so that she ingests the suds, hoping in so doing to constitute a new, whiter, and better truth. Trethewey's readers might fear for the child, if not for the opening lines, which tell us of the lies the speaker, quote, could tell, emphasis mine, back, quote, when I was growing up, lines 1 through 2. As an adult, the narrator appears to have moved beyond the feelings and lies of her childhood, her parallel bloodlines flowing together in a more harmonious confluence. Hers has been a fraught journey, however. Even during the time of the poem, passing remained dangerous, with the potential for being detected and suffering as a result ever present. While drawing comparisons involving her classmates' dresses and her own, the narrator uses a non-standard prepositional phrase in a way that likely reflects AAVE, African American Vernacular English. Neither Leahy nor Sullivan comments upon it, nor have the hundreds of students we have taught the poem, even when asked to look for an instance of AAVE. The narrator says she can pretend her dresses, quote, came straight out the window, line 13. Even when asked to read aloud, students often supply the invisible additional preposition of, saying straight out of the window. This small slip, a single 2-letter word, could give away the entire ruse. Trethewey, in constructing the poem, has put into her speaker's mouth just enough evidence to damn her. We never learn exactly why the, quote, white girl, line 16, squeezes the narrator's hand and refers to there now being, quote, 3 of us in this class, line 18, but a discerning ear may provide the explanation. Perhaps, in fact, the ear may have heard what the eye cannot see. The subtlest hint that the narrator is not exactly the person she portrays. Note, however, that between the narrator's reference to the white girl and this second child's utterance, the perspective shifts from third person to first person. We assume that us refers to white girls, or at least white people. But what if the poem contains another bit of subterfuge even less obvious than the one we have already noted? Leahy and Sullivan both accept that the class is primarily African American, and thus the narrator comes across to her white classmate as part of a larger minority of white children in it. Such is not necessarily the case. A former student suggested that, quote, 3 of us may, instead, refer to the number of children in the class who have seized upon an opportunity to pass for white. Such a child would not only face the constant fear of discovery, but may also pay special attention to the matter of passing, staying especially attuned to a vague street address, a missing store tag, or a dropped preposition. The second child may speak up not because she is a deceived white child, but rather because she is a perceptive multiracial one. Like the narrator, she may live at the confluence of her racial backgrounds, and she may be even more experienced at what convergence suggests and more attuned to the slightest variations that hint at one of the streams which have symbolically flowed together in another child's bloodstream. If we accept this reading, then yet another white lie, which is to say, another lie about whiteness, faintly emerges. Readers tend not to notice this reading, not because it is implausible, but because we simply accept what we see as real. A white child is a white child, even if the child is passing. Indeed, if we fail to notice the instance of AAVE because our eyes fill in and of, then we may also not consider that multiple children in the classroom are passing, because even after the narrator tells us that she passes while at school, we still do not think to look for other children doing the same. The only way to know would be if we could slip into the classroom in the poem and count whether 3 or more children look white, a distasteful prospect then and now. Whether with or without awareness, we must live with our uncertainty. But isn't that what poetry and matters of a construct such as race already make us do? White lies forces us to consider the phenomenon of passing and its consequences for at least one child who has not yet grown into adulthood. The willingness the narrator of White Lies shows in telling about her past lies strongly suggests that she has made peace with her own identity and its confluences of black and white. We cannot say as much for any other children from her class who may also have passed during their childhoods. The narrator has achieved something denied the female protagonist of the 1933 Fannie Hurst novel Imitation of Life, the 1934 and 1959 film versions of this novel, and Nella Larsen's 1929 novel Passing. All of these works appeared before the 1964 Civil Rights Act was passed and signed into law by President Johnson. This law, the Loving v. Virginia decision, and indeed the life and career of Natasha Trethewey all show the progress the United States has made in moving somewhat beyond the artificial boundaries of race and toward a confluence that reflects our many cultures and many hues. Perhaps it is not too much to hope that one day passing will become as inconsequential as hair dye, truly a little white lie. Until then, however, White Lies and its literary and film antecedents remind us of the work that remains.